Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to this week's episode of Couch Trip Therapy for Everyday Life. That's your host, Eddie Reece. I'm Billy Courtright, and we're about to get into a compelling topic. As we do every episode, Eddie tells me what we're going to talk about. And in this case, we're going to talk about grief, which stands to reason because I think a lot of people who look for a therapist or consider therapy are doing so because perhaps something is difficult, or perhaps something isn't as they might want it to be. And I know we spent quite a bit of time in episode 3 about trauma. So I thought we would dive into grief based on Eddie's recommendations. So I guess I'll start with the question I always ask, which is, Eddie, what can you tell us about grief that we don't already know?
Well, I hope a lot of things that you don't already know. But I think that an awful lot of people get grief and the process of grieving wrong. Tend to look at grief in general like folks look at everything else. That grief is this thing you have in a box, and you open that box and you do whatever you're gonna do, and you're finished with it, and you put it back, and then you're done. Not an awful lot of things emotionally that I would work with a client or with myself as a client that are like that. And grief is certainly not like that. I look at grief as a part of everyday life. I wrote a line that said, "To live well, you need to grieve well." I think something like that. Grieving well is living well. Because grieving is saying goodbye, and processing the passing of something. So when I was really sort of practicing grief and learning to incorporate it daily, I would do things like when I went to bed at night, I would say goodbye to the day. And we talk in a second about what a good goodbye entails. But for my goodbye to the day, I would sort of replay the day and, wow, that was awesome. That was awful. I wish that had been different. I'm glad that was like that. Thank you for this, gratitude. So you put all these different things in there and you say goodbye because that day's gone, never coming back. And I'm moving one day closer to death. So it sort of helps keep in consciousness that we're moving along. What is it? The days are long, but the years are short.
Yeah, that's my
Um,
wife and I have seen that plaque
yeah,
before as we had
yeah,
kids.
uh-huh. And so sometimes we lose sight that we're moving along, and it's very common for people and to go, "Gosh, where'd the time go?" If you're asking that question, I think probably to some degree what happened in your life that you're thinking about is that you weren't fully present at times, and you also weren't grieving, which is marking that passing. So if I'm saying goodbye to every day, I'm marking the passing of each one of those days. So I'm a little more aware that a day has passed, that I'm started the day here on my journey through my life and I ended here. So that's movement.
Mm.
So grief is every day. You and I are having this conversation and it will come to an end. And so you say goodbye to that and the passing of it. And so you can do this with anything. And anything, especially anything that matters in some way. So, if you get, I mean, you can do it with silly things too, just to sort of make the point of if you get a haircut, say goodbye to the hair that's on the floor. That was once part of me.
Mm.
Now it's not. Thank you for being part of me. Thank you for, spending some time there. Thank you for growing and becoming, what you were, and now, goodbye, and I appreciate you. You know. And so, I mean, you can just do it with anything like that, just to keep your mindset in this idea that time is passing. And I think that's a big purpose of grief. My line of, if you want to live well, grieve well. Because if you're not grieving, if you're not saying goodbye, what happens is all of these goodbyes that you haven't done will build up. All the grief that you haven't experienced builds up. And as that happens, we have a tendency to want to make up for. And the best example of this is in romantic relationships. You have this relationship that lasts for weeks, months, years. It comes to an end. I don't know of anybody who has ever done a really good goodbye and a full goodbye around any of those relationships. So you end the relationship, and you might even remain friends and cordial toward each other, but you still never say goodbye to it. So what happens is, somewhat consciously, a lot unconsciously, there were things that you wanted that relationship to provide for you that it didn't. Instead of saying goodbye to that and processing the grief around that, you take those things into the next relationship and you want that relationship to make up for. When you do that, you literally cannot see the new relationship for what it is and as it is, because you're looking at it through this lens of what it needs to be to make up for the last one and the one before that and the one before that and my childhood and everything else. Virtually everybody gets married, if not everybody, gets married to some degree to take care of, make up for every wrong that's ever happened to them. And this sounds crazy, but when you sit with clients in a session and start working through their stuff, you'll hear it. We want our partners to be the mother, father, brother, sister, grandparent that was not what I ideally wanted. I remember a comedian talking about he and his wife fighting. So, Dad, she gets mad about things like me leaving my socks on the floor. And then she starts and she left your socks on the floor again. And I have to pick up after you. And if I have to pick up after you and you're leaving your clothes everywhere, it's like you're a child. And I'm not going to be married to a child. I don't want to have a sex with a child. I'm not your mother, you know? So, and there's a lot of truth in that probably his mom picked up his socks, never said a word. So he was trained, put your socks there, they appear magically in the drawer clean.
Mm.
Why would you do it any differently?
Right.
Okay. So he has to grieve the loss of this mother he had and what he liked so that he can see the wife that he has instead of being mad at her because she's not the mother
Right.
that I want. It was a great episode, and I don't remember the details enough to pull anything from it, but of Two and a Half Men, where Charlie has this realization that the girl he's dating is exactly like his mother, you know? And his brother spends time trying to tell him the Bertha, the housekeeper's trying to, and, this is your mother, this is your mother. You know, and Charlie's like, no, she's nothing like that.
Mm.
You know, and so we all marry the things that we liked about our parents, siblings, grandparents, whoever's involved in our childhood, and the things we didn't like. The things we like, we want that person to be that for us, and the things we didn't like, we want that to change.
Right. Or be not there.
Not there, which means change. You gotta stop acting that way.
Right.
I'm going to make up for having a mother who did this. You're not gonna do it. That's gonna make up for it. Rather than grieving the loss of what I never had, which is a really important lesson of grief. There's a lot of grieving to be done about the things you never got.
Hmm.
You have to grieve those.
Well, at risk of sounding a little naive, but if I'm thinking it, I'm guessing there are others out there thinking it as well. And that is it more common for individuals to struggle with grief in the saying goodbye to everyday type things? Or would it be more dealing with the grief of major loss? Like when I just mentioned grief at the top of the episode, I immediately went to loved ones who are no longer
Mhm.
here.
Mhm.
And now obviously I have bad days and weeks and months and quarters and years I'd like to rewrite. But I guess I never looked at that as grieving. I looked at it as
Mhm.
a lot of things, but you're reframing my mind, which I love. But how much of your clients are dealing with grief on the everyday level compared to unaddressed, resolved, or accepted grief on a major level? A parent, a spouse, a
Mhm.
pet, a
Sure.
loved one.
Yeah, nobody's gonna come in and go, I need help grieving my, day-to-day things.
Right,
Because again, we don't even know we're supposed to do that
right.
or that it's a good idea to do that. And part of why it is not only because those are gone, so say goodbye and grieve, but you're practicing grief. So if you're think about it this way, if you practice grief every day, and some losses of the day are bigger than other losses of the day, okay, and you're learning how to grieve. And the more you learn, then a big loss happens, you know the drill. And what you do with the big loss is no different than the small loss. It's just bigger. So that's another reason to do this, to say goodbye to everything. Ideally, somebody you see on a regular basis, you would take a moment each time that particular encounter with them ended and say goodbye to them, which would include saying any and everything you'd want to say to them if you knew they were going to die after they left. And always have those things in mind, which also keeps you conscious of the passing of things and the uncertainty of things. Because they could die before you see them next time.
Right.
So if you you're in an ongoing relationship, friend, family, coworker, anybody that you have more than a passing attachment to, there should be a constant goodbye process going on with that person. You don't have to say the same thing every time you're saying goodbye, but you're going to shorthand it somehow. Sometimes I'm in the mood and it's not really the nicest way to say goodnight, but my wife says goodnight to me and she'll say, see you in the morning. And I go, I hope so. Yeah. I don't know. One of us should be dead in the morning. Who knows? So I guess I guess I will see you in the morning. I don't think you're just going to be abducted by aliens, but you could be dead, you know? So it's a constant reminder. And I really do see it as a lifestyle. Before I wind up forgetting the whole thing, let me talk about what a good goodbye is. Okay. A way to think about it is, the really dramatic kind of goodbyes. You're with somebody and they're on their deathbed, and this is the last conversation you're going to have with them. You want to say everything there is to say. You don't want to leave and go, "Oh, I wish I'd said that to them." And a good goodbye has a lot of things. There's like reminiscing. I remember this time that this happened. And that was really awesome. I remember this time, and that was really horrible. I remember when we first met and this happened and that happened, I had this impression of you and I thought, this about you. But as I got to know you and this happened and that happened, I came to know you as this kind of person. And that was great. And, you were really so instrumental in helping me with this. And, I wish we had had more times like this together. And my life without you is just will never be the same. And I'm always going to want to reach out to you or, whatever you want to say to them. Say things that you wish were different, I wish you hadn't have, done this. I wish we hadn't have gone through that. I wish, I could have been more this way. I wish I'd said these things or spoken up more about this with you, or I wish I hadn't have been so afraid of you about these things. Just any and everything. And so you want to cover anything that'd be there, and you want to not only share those thoughts, everything I just shared was a thought, but you want to share the emotion that goes with them too. Grief is the experience of pretty much every human emotion as you grieve something. And the bigger that grief is, the bigger the loss, the more you're going to go back and forth in all of these, and they're going to be that much deeper for you. And there is no straight line of grieving. People come in and they go, I'm stuck in my grief. And I go, well, what that generally means is they think there's a timeline, they're here, and they can't move on to there. But that's not the way it works.
Right.
You're probably not stuck anywhere. You're someplace that you're trying to get out of sooner than you're going to. You need to explore it more. And some people go, I'm still not over it. Especially if it's a big loss, and I go, okay, let's say you are. You're over it now. What would that mean? Somebody brings this person up and you're over them. What would that mean? What would be different? I've never had anybody really be able to answer that question very well. It might say something like, well, then it wouldn't bother me. And I go, what kind of horrible person are you? This person that meant so much to you, somebody brings them up and they just, oh yeah, they're dead. Doesn't bother me.
And
It doesn't mean that you break down and cry. You might tell a funny story. That's
yes,
grief. Oh yeah, he was awesome, man. There was this one time, it's just so funny. That's grieving. There's a human emotion attached to the relationship, and you're experiencing it. So grief changes over time,
yeah.
and you move through different places, and you'll never get over it. Why would you? What in the world? How could you be so cold to get over it?
Yeah. It doesn't go away. It just gets different. It gets more
It's
manageable.
different.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's more manageable if you've been doing it, but grief isn't anything you want to manage.
It's maybe that's a better word, but I
Mm.
just think it's not that it's more manageable. It's just that it's less. It's just less. It's there's a
Mm.
there's a suddenness to it, in my opinion, and then it's over almost like all encompassing. And then
Mhm.
yes, that hopefully there's some reconciling, and then it never goes away, but it just it gets to. I mean, I speaking for me only. I mean, there were times it was just very difficult for me to think of anything other than loss and no more
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
pain. And then it's interesting that, when you gather to those, well, in my family, which are Catholic funerals, which are big and there's lots of food and,
Mhm.
uh, and inevitably there will be laughter. Um,
Mhm.
and there's a compartmentalizing of the pain. And I remember, you know, recently we had a death in the family that was sudden and tragic and difficult and galvanizing and there was a lot of things. And it was my father-in-law. So there was a lot of people in our home, and
Mhm.
there was a sense of, while everyone was here and we were going through the funeral and the wake and the cremation and all the things that you had to do and you're busy.
Mhm.
And I remember someone saying to my wife and I that because we were doing okay, I guess, and it was like she said, "Just wait until everybody leaves." It's like
Mhm.
this whole thing starts over again because now you're alone with your thoughts. You're alone with one another.
Mhm.
The house is different. The world is different. And she was so right. And
Oh,
it
yeah.
did. We had to go through it, but we went through it together. And I think that
Mhm.
made it so much more, I don't even know what word to put on it, but it was different. And I still don't know if we processed it properly. And I don't know if my boys processed it properly, but we in this house have a way of just one day it's no longer a thing.
Mhm.
And it's like I remember thinking,
Um,
geez, that was quick. Should we have done something?
well well, I can tell you how you can find out. Write a letter to your father-in-law and do a good goodbye. So the scene is you're there at his deathbed and you're going to say all the things that are in this letter to him. And when you have that letter, if you were a client, I'd have you bring the letter in and I would tell you, and then I'll show you what to do with it. I would tell you what we're going to do. But what you do is you have them read it. You have the client read it. And I say, but the goal is not to read it. The goal is to read out loud what you wrote and to listen to it as though you had never heard it before and see how your body responds. And I've had people not get to the first word in a session. They just look at it and fall apart. And then they kind of gather themselves and look at it again and start to say a word, fall apart. So you'll find out.
And that
Um,
falling apart is cathartic. It's important. It's healing.
it's part of grieving. When you lose something precious is the word I really like. Devastation is the only reaction that makes sense. Speaking of Catholic funerals, I had a therapist that I was seeing in a group, and he died. So after I'd finished seeing him, and big Catholic wedding, and I got there kind of as just as the service was starting, and his wife, um, 50, 60 years or something, I would imagine, sitting on right up front, and his wife was wailing, the only word, just wailing, and throughout the whole service, the entire time we were in the service, she wailed. There was not a break. And I was so just like, wow, wow, that that's what you would do.
Or you hope would be done for you.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, but you know, if I go to my wife's funeral, I'm gonna be wailing. You know? So yeah, that's how else would you feel?
Well, I think people
You
are
know?
all up in their feelings and thoughts about whether or not that's appropriate or polite.
Sure, because we're first of all, we're not taught how to grieve. We're not taught what grieving really is, and we're not taught how to deal with much of anything emotionally. And it reminds me there's a book I never read the book, but the title I love. It's called "A Good Marriage Will Break Your Heart," and I read an extensive interview with the author's wife, I believe it was. And the thesis of the book is that a good marriage will break your heart because if it's a good marriage, you stay together, you really love each other. At some point, one of you is probably going to bury the other. So it's going to break your heart. And as I'm hearing all this, everything that he was writing about a marriage, I said, this applies to how people live their lives. He said that on some level, everybody knows that everything ends. And he said, so you know the marriage is going to end. And I'm thinking, so you know everything's going to end. And he said, so instead of going all in on that marriage, especially emotionally, and really being as connected as any two human beings could be connected by sharing everything and caring so deeply about somebody, he said, people don't do that because if they do that, they know how bad it's going to hurt at the end. And they don't want to hurt that bad. And so they wind up with a mediocre marriage. And I'm like, that's the way most of us live our lives. We said we want to fully live our lives, but I don't think we really do in a lot of ways because imagine, man, I mean, if you led this life that was just amazing to you, the most incredible life you could have ever lived. Okay, now you're going to die. You're going to be devastated. Who wants to be devastated? So I think we tend to lean toward mediocrity, not meaning to, but by never really fully giving of ourselves, putting ourselves fully out there, being all that we are inside, which sometimes is pretty awesome and sometimes really sucks, you know, because there's a lot of pain and heartache in there too. So you've got to put all that out there and share that with people. Like you said, you went through this with your wife, and that made all the difference. Is we have to share these things in order to really process them. In order, what really happens is they get reflected back to us, and so we can see ourselves as others see us, which means we're really seeing ourselves better. We can't see ourselves just through our own eyes. You know, we got to see parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. So
So,
that's that. You know, that kind of grief. You've got to welcome it. You've got to want it, which means you want to be really good at it. And I tell people, I go, you really want to be good at this. You know, if they're in their 20, 30, 40s, even 50s, I go, you know, you may have decades left to go, and you want to get really good at it, because I can tell you from my own experience, the older I get, the more grieving there is to do. You know, people say, "Oh, you know, my dream is to live a long, really healthy life, have all of my senses, you know, all of my life, and live a long time." You know, and I go, okay, that sounds great. Let's take a look at that. Let's say you live to be 130. Let's go crazy here. And you're still sharp as a tack, man, at 130. You can still get around okay. You know, maybe you got a walker, or you got somebody kind of helps you get up and sit back down, but you're 130, man. You're kicking butt. Let's see what your life looks like. I wonder how many funerals you're going to go to.
mm,
Wonder how many hospital visits, how many family members you got to say goodbye to, how many pets you're going to have die. How many friends are you going to watch suffer? That's what you're asking for. So you better be really good at it, because you're going to be doing a lot of it the older you get. I mean, I'm noticing that, you know, in the last several years, it seems like once or twice a week, somebody I admired growing up dies. I mean, you know, and it's like, oh my gosh, you know, they're dying all around me. So get good at it, you know. Grieving well is living well, and I haven't come across much. Maybe some of our listeners have come across something that they've read or seen in a movie or book or something that is describing grief kind of along the way that I do it. Grief is almost always portrayed as you cry really hard, and then you kind of are okay, you know,
maybe
and that's just part of it.
I think that is true, and for me personally, when I think of grief, I think of a couple things. One, I think of hearing people say they need to grieve, or they
Mhm.
never grieved, or
Mhm.
like it's all like some almost 50% of the time, it's referenced in a way that someone is passing some sort of judgment over the behavior of an individual as it relates
Right.
to some sort of loss. And you'll hear something like, well, they haven't grieved, or they haven't grieved properly, or they need to grieve. And it's like cursory. It's like they're not outside of you and I mean, they're not a therapist. So you're like, yeah, okay, yeah, that could be. And then you kind of just go on with the conversation. And I hear that a lot. And it's usually being said in the presence of perceived lack of dealing, or negative life
Mhm.
behavior experience, or no
Sure.
visual representation of that wailing, as you put it. And then the other thing that I hear about a lot as it relates to grief are the phases of grief,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is a model I know, but you haven't mentioned it. So a couple questions for you. One is, that personal viewpoint that someone is a certain way because they haven't grieved. Maybe that's right, maybe that isn't. And then where do the phases fall as it pertains to you?
Well, the to go back to the first thing you were talking about when folks are saying they haven't grieved, just in that statement is an implication that, again, grieving is this thing, you take it out of the box, you do it, and you put it back in the box, and you're done with it,
And you can do it
which
right or wrong.
and you do it right or wrong, and you do it at a proper pace, and that's just not how it works. So what you're really hearing if somebody says that is they have not behaved the way that I believe they're supposed to behave,
Right.
and therefore they're not like me, so something's wrong with them. That's what they're really saying. In terms of phases, the phases are every human emotion. And you're gonna go through them and like that.
But do you agree that they're
There
all required?
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
if somebody says, "Hey, I need help with my grieving," I'll say, "Okay." Their grandmother died. Tell me a funny story about your grandmother. I'll start there to help them understand that's part of it. To tell a funny story about your grandmother, that's remembering something that was precious to you, a moment that mattered to you, and to say goodbye to that, you know? So it's all of those things, and in the beginning, you might not even cry. In the beginning, you're just in shock.
right.
In the beginning, you've got a lot to do in terms of arrangements and things to do and things that so you just kind of go into remote mode and you get that done. I mean, that's part of the process. You've got to do those things. It will happen as it happens. The trick is to be open to whatever. Don't try to demand that you do it in a certain way or by a certain time. Make space for it. And a client that's telling me about a loss he just had, and he says, "I really notice how much I'm distracting myself," and I'm like, "Oh, sure," I said, he says, "I want to stop doing all these distractive things," and I'm like, "Well, instead of trying to stop that, see what you can do to just make time, even if it's a few moments of getting up from work and walking outside and taking a break, which you would normally do anyway, and take a breath and say, say to your loved one, gosh, I wish you were here to see this weather. You love this kind of weather, you know. And you may not have any big emotion about that, but just say hello. Just take some time and then go back to work. I mean, that was a few moments. You don't have to plan some big something for hours at a time. That's the day to day.
Yeah. No, that's definitely well said,
Yeah.
and
So
well
I
described.
don't, I wouldn't even think of saying to a client, "Well, you're in the C phase of grieving now."
Well, right. It's not a progression.
No,
It's their
no, you're
phases.
not.
They're just their
It's
stages.
just
Their
you're
roots.
you're you're sad now. You're happy now. You're numb now.
Right.
You know, you can be all those things
Right.
over and over and over. You know, and it takes a while. And again, if you listen to the podcast, I think we're made up of all these different parts. Different parts will get the news of the loss at different times. And the way that shows up is you're just kind of motoring along and you see something or hear something or whatever, and you go, "Oh man, Joe, Joe would love this," and you start calling, you know, because that's a part of you that hasn't gotten the news yet. And so allow that to really hit you. And then you can grieve that. You could, you go, "Wow, I can't call her. Wow, I would love to have shared this with him. He would have had a good laugh." I
Yeah.
loved when that happened. We really shared that kind of humor together. Damn, I miss that. It's really nobody else that I would even think about sharing this with.
Yeah. And then there are the times, the times of year. Oh, those are tough
Sure,
because
but
the
yeah.
firsts, the string of
First, all the
firsts.
first. Yeah, and I tell my clients that, I go, it's gonna take 12 months from now for you to go through all the firsts.
Yeah.
And so allow that to be,
Right.
and invite whatever needs to be invited in terms of how you feel, what you think. And so, yeah, you're going to get through the first, and then you'll go through the seconds, and it'll be a little different than the first, and then the thirds. And
Yeah.
at
And then
some
you're like, can you
point,
believe
it's
they've been gone for 3 years?
right, yeah. And so it changes, but it's there, and why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't it
Right.
be? You know? Um,
So can I ask you a question?
yeah.
So when, we talked a good amount about healthy, a healthy way to deal, I guess, best way to put it. And,
Mhm.
I'm relating to a lot of it and it's bringing up some thoughts and emotions and all that stuff. But like, what might someone be feeling or experiencing when they're not dealing? When maybe there needs to be some attention paid to this inability to deal, and like what would the warning signs be? What might
Oh,
someone be?
that you're stuffing it down?
Yeah.
The same warning signs that you're stuffing anything down, which is an awful lot of people's everyday life. Uh, you're
Yeah.
you're staying really busy. You're sticking to a routine, doing the same thing day after day, which means you're not taking time for different parts of yourself, or selves.
Yeah.
That you get up and you're doing the same thing every day, even if you're enjoying it. There's probably other parts of you that are not really interested in any of that. So certainly if there's some fairly fresh grieving that needs to happen, like I was saying to my client, make time for that. Set some time aside for that. Don't just go to the distractions. And if you find yourself going to a distraction, pull yourself back and go, wait a minute, I need to sit with this loss for a while. Write a letter, talk to the person, tell them things, excuse me, just day-to-day stuff, you know, hey, hey, buddy, you yesterday, so and so gave me a call and we talked about this, and we're gonna go to the lake, and I was thinking how much you really like the lake, and just any of the day-to-day thing that had any that you might have shared anyway. Just that this death ends the life of a body. It doesn't end the relationship.
Hmm.
So you will always have this relationship. It's different now, but you're carrying your irritations with them. All the things that you had with them are still there. And so carry on the relationship.
Well, don't you? I mean, what about the people who are pain averse and they just resist the at almost all costs. They resist the invite to go there because they know it's going to be painful.
Well, if I had a client tell me that, I would go, "You're really not pain averse. As a matter of fact, you're pretty masochistic."
Probably true. I would agree with that.
Because Jung said this. I think I had a little saying about it. I can't remember what it was at the moment, but Jung talked about, you know, something along the lines of avoiding pain causes pain. So now you got two pains, and you got pain on top of pain. So you're not pain averse, you're actually creating more and more of it. So if you really don't want to experience pain, then don't live,
Right. Well, yeah, you're
because
making sense,
that's
but it doesn't
just
change the
part of
fact that you
it.
still hear, "I can't do this right now," or "I don't want to do this right
Okay. Okay. You don't have to do it right now. When do you want to do it? Let's schedule a time.
now." Yeah.
I'm serious. You
No,
need
I
to
get it.
schedule
I
a
can't be the only
time.
one that has either said or heard this.
Right. You need to schedule a time.
Yeah.
And you need to give the relationship, give the loss, the reverence is the word that pops to mind. It's not a word I use. The reverence
I
it
like that.
deserves,
Sure.
This is a revere of the person. And so show them that, and if it hurts, the thing that I really believe about anybody avoiding feelings is that it's not so much that they don't want to experience the feeling because they experience the feelings. It's that we don't want to experience the feelings alone. The real damage that happens to us is not that we were hurt. That's damaging. But the real damage that really causes the problems is that there was no one there for us.
Right.
And so if you don't want to experience the pain, it's probably because you don't have the experience of sharing that pain with someone who is emotionally adept enough to not try to fix it, be codependent, make it better. but to go, oh my gosh, I can see how painful this is. I'll sit with you as long as you need. It was let it rip. And if they want to be held, you hold them. If they want you to just sit with them, sit with them. Whatever brings them comfort. Because that's when you really heal, and that's when you lose that fear. So instead of going, oh, I have a pain to experience, instead of going, I don't want to do that, you go, who would be good to share this with? Because when you do that with somebody, that's when you're actually being loved and cared for. That's what real love, meaningful love and caring is here's the stuff that for whatever reason I'm afraid of or I don't like or whatever, which means I don't want anybody to see it. And so, but I'm going to show it to you. And they go, oh man, that sounds awful. But you create that space for them to have it. And you're right there with them. And so their nervous system learns that you don't have to be alone in that stuff. And when you have that experience, it's so profound for most people because it's something that they have longed for their whole lives pretty much, but never even knew they were longing for it. But they could rattle off a whole bunch of other longings they have, which are all substitute. And so you get that need met, and you go, wow, I got something I didn't even really know existed. And it's not like you run out to go get more of it. Okay, because, you know, this is another freaking growth opportunity. Oh boy. But you don't shove it away. You go, yeah. Nah." But you reach out and you say, come here. I don't know what to do with you, but I want to take care of you. I'm going to find somebody that can help us with this. I can't do it well enough. I'm sorry. So it's all of that is grieving on. And again, if you did nothing but just live your life, you have plenty of stuff to grieve. Plenty of stuff, you know. And again, a lot of it, if you can't think of anything, is the loss of what you never had. Especially if you believe you were somehow supposed to get it, you were promised it, and it didn't happen. Those things, you've got to grieve those things. Because if you don't, you're going to keep going out there and trying to get it in some form. But that's impossible. You're never going to be that little boy or little girl and that child, that precious child, and have this ideal caretaker love you in this ideal way that you want to be loved all the time. That's impossible. Even if they could do it now, you can't be little and they can't be younger, and you go back and do that. So say goodbye to that, and you'll quit demanding it from everybody else.
Well, there's a reason.
Mm-hmm.
What the one thing I've taken from this conversation more than anything is that, unresolved, or maybe resolved is not the right word, but unprocessed, unrecognized, unprocessed grief amounts to more difficulty in the relationships we still have or have
Oh,
or
it's
will have.
it's probably in a lot of ways the biggest part of what we struggle with in our relationships, even more so than, you know, whatever our mess is about relationships and what they're supposed to be and how we're supposed to be and the other's supposed to be. Even outside of all that, the grief that you haven't lived with and through will completely cloud your vision about your reality. And so you literally cannot see in front of you what really is. You can't see this person for who they really are. You see them primarily for what they're not, that you believe they're supposed to be because you didn't get that and you're supposed to get it.
Yeah, it's more what you believe, what you wish they'd be.
Right. And being mad about that, and you see them through that lens, so they're lacking in this. But that's all made up. They're not lacking anything in that. And couples who are really struggling, that's what they're doing more of than seeing what they really like about this person. And there's plenty of couples I've seen who have been in struggle for so long. They can't even name the things that they like about the other person. They can only share their grievances.
Yeah.
And so that's that has a whole lot to do with unlived, unprocessed, unresolved grief.
Well, you can't spell grievance without grief.
That's true. Yeah. All from the same word. So yeah, grieve well, you live well. And I feel like there's some other things that we haven't covered about it, so maybe they'll pop up somewhere else in another podcast. But this is a really, really, really important issue, and I, it took a while for me to really learn to work it into my day to day life and see the world that way. But such a profound difference in my world, and be able to pay attention to the passing of time and the passing of what will be, and saying goodbye to things all the time is it really does make a difference. And again, I could we could go over any of our podcast topics, and I could show you how not grieving is a piece of any of that stuff we talked about, and how
Right.
if you could grieve well, it would ease this an awful lot. So I guess I'm just trying to stress the importance of it, which I don't think I can really do adequately enough.
Well, one thing I
So I'll
heard.
grieve that.
Well, there you go. And then to kind of summarize and food for thought for future conversations, but just to summarize what we discussed here today in the context of grief, and I'm better for it. So I know there are many other people that are as well. But the idea that in recognizing this grief and recognizing the parting and the goodbye and being accepting of all of the emotions that go with that, the anger and the sadness and the laughter and joy too. Maybe there's resentment, maybe there's regret, maybe there's whatever, but they're ultimately what I heard, just me, my interpretation of what we talked about for the last hour was that through this process, it is a process, and it could be used as a noun or a verb. You could process it, or it can be a
Mhm.
process. But at the end of the day, there there may be acceptance, but it's never resolved. Like it's just
Yeah.
it's an ongoing thing, and it reminds me of some of the early episodes where we discussed that your goal as a therapist and a lot of your patients who say, I just want to be happy, and you say, well, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but what would be victory for me is if you could live the entire human experience
Mhm.
and do so appreciatively. And,
Mhm.
it's hard for people to appreciate sorrow. It's hard for people to appreciate sadness. But to truly live, and in your words, live well, then these emotions, every one of them, the good ones and the not so pleasant ones, it's that bitter and sweet thing. You gotta, in some contexts,
Mhm.
the sweet isn't as sweet without
Mm.
the presence of that
Without the
bitter.
bitter. Oh, yeah, that's a whole 'nother topic of how you can't see the stars without the darkness. And so if you wanna be happy, excited, carefree, any of those sorts of feelings we all think are the really good ones. Even with those things you have experienced that you would call that, there's more to it. There's a more of a depth to all of it if you're willing to experience the devastation, the heartbreak, the despair, the loneliness, the longing, all of all of those things play off of each other, and we fool ourselves all the time that we can have happiness without the sadness. But I guarantee you, spend a few minutes with me, and I'll show you how pursuing your happiness has made you miserable. That's so many people that come in here and they go, I did everything right. I got a nice this and a nice that and a nice this, but I'm not happy. Yeah, well, because you went out and did everything you thought would make you happy, and now you're miserable. That's how you make yourself miserable. Alright. So, yeah, you experience all of it, you know? When you said sorrow, I hadn't thought about this in a long time. It's John Irving book. It might have been in Hotel New Hampshire. There's a dog named Sorrow. Whichever book the dog Sorrow is in of John Irving. And there's a chapter called Sorrow Floats. And it's just terrific metaphor. Um, but the importance of it, the Pixar movies, the second one's out now, Inside Out 2.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the second one. I saw the first one, which was just great.
Yeah. Well,
Pretty simplified version of it all, but it really is how this works. She learns how the importance of sadness.
yeah.
So yeah, there are no good emotions, bad emotions. There are emotions, and they're all just as valuable, every one of them. So welcome them all, embrace them all, want them all. And then you're not afraid of them. And if you're not afraid of them, you can welcome them, you can experience them, and then you'll get more of all of them. You'll get more profound experiences with all of them. And then when you share that with another human being, you get another thing that we all really want, that we sort of know we want, but we don't really know what it is we want. We just want to be deeply connected in the depth of those emotions.
Mhm.
It's great to experience a beautiful sunset by myself. I have no problem with that. I like that. To to share it with somebody too is a whole different. It's not better, right? But it's a whole different experience of being part of a herd, and to to know that you can do that, that these people are there for you, an awesome feeling. So all this, you get all this by grieving. I think that's where I'm rambling to.
No, it's beautiful. It was well said. Again, one of the more compelling conversations on a topic that affects each and every one of us, likely in different ways. I learned quite a bit. I was asking questions for myself. I was asking questions for someone else. But either
I
way,
know this, my friend. Let me ask you about this.
well, I'm not going to
Yeah,
cliche
yeah,
myself to death, but I will say that, some of them were for me and then some of them were for someone I care about an awful lot, and you can draw your own conclusions there. But
yeah.
either way, I'm grateful. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another outstanding episode of Couch Trip Therapy for Everyday Life. Today we dug fairly deep, and we could go deeper and we could go longer, but let's just put a pin in it here because on the subject and topic of grief, grieving and the sweet sorrow that is parting and saying goodbye and recognizing that which was important to us or perhaps doesn't serve us anymore, whatever the case might be. But I think it's important. And hearing Eddie articulate in a way that only he can, a topic that, undoubtedly affects every one of us, it was really, really helpful. And I, for one, am grateful. So Eddie, this has been our first of probably a couple different episodes on the grieving process. And I'm a fan, so thank you, man.
Thanks, Billy. That was
All right.
fun.